What I'm about to tell you happened just 3 weeks ago, and it's still hard to believe. I thought I knew my husband and my best friend. I thought I knew what betrayal looked like. I was wrong about all three. My name is Sarah, and for the past 8 months, the two people I trusted most in this world have been lying to my face. They've been planning something so calculated, so manipulative, that when I finally discovered the truth, it shattered everything I believed about love, friendship, and trust. You see, this wasn't just an affair. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake. This was an elaborate, months-long conspiracy to create a secret family behind my back. A plan so detailed that they had backup stories, fake timelines, and even researched divorce lawyers just in case I found out. By the end of this video, you'll understand why I'm sitting here today in my new apartment, why my marriage is over, and why my so-called best friend of 12 years is now blocked on every platform I have. But more importantly, you'll learn the warning signs I missed, signs that could save you from the same devastating betrayal. If you've ever wondered how far someone you love could go to deceive you, stick around, because this story will change how you look at the people closest to you forever. And I mean that, after what I discovered, I'll never trust anyone the same way again. But before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. And if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, drop a broken heart in the comments. You're not alone in this. To understand how deep this betrayal goes, I need to take you back to the beginning. Back when I thought I had the perfect life, the perfect marriage, and the perfect best friend. My husband Jake and I have been married for 6 years. We met in college during our sophomore year. I was studying marketing, he was in architecture. Our first date was at this tiny coffee shop near campus, where he spent 2 hours sketching the building across the street while I talked about my dreams of working for a major agency. Most guys would have been bored, but Jake, he listened to every word while his hands moved across the paper. When he showed me the sketch later, he'd incorporated little details I'd mentioned. A billboard with my favorite brand, windows that looked like the ones in my childhood home. That's the kind of man I fell in love with. Thoughtful, attentive, someone who noticed the small things that mattered to me. After graduation, we moved to the city together. Jake landed a job at a prestigious architecture firm, and I started climbing the corporate ladder at a marketing company. We dated for 3 years before he proposed, and when he did, it was perfect. He designed and built a miniature version of our dream house, complete with tiny furniture and a little ring box hidden in the bedroom. We were that couple everyone envied. You know the type. We finished each other's sentences, had inside jokes that made us laugh until we cried, and genuinely enjoyed spending time together. Even after 6 years of marriage, Jake still brought me flowers every Friday, just because. He remembered that I liked the white roses, not the red ones, and that I preferred them in small bouquets rather than those huge arrangements that take up half the kitchen counter. And then there's Emma. God, where do I even start with Emma? Emma and I met during freshman orientation week. She was my randomly assigned roommate, and I remember thinking she was everything I wasn't confident, outgoing, the kind of person who could walk into any room and instantly become the center of attention. I was shy, focused on my studies, perfectly content with a small circle of close friends. Emma was the opposite. She collected people like they were souvenirs. But somehow, we clicked. She brought me out of my shell, and I kept her grounded. We balanced each other perfectly. When I was too scared to apply for competitive internships, Emma would literally sit next to me and make me fill out the applications. When she was making impulsive decisions, like the time she wanted to drop out junior year to backpack through Europe, I talked her through the pros and cons until she found a better solution. Emma was my maid of honor at my wedding. She gave this beautiful speech about how Jake was lucky to find someone who would love him as completely as I did, and how she'd never seen two people more perfect for each other. She cried during the speech. Happy tears, she said. The whole room was in tears by the end of it. Emma was practically part of our family from day one of my marriage. She had a key to our house, joined us for holidays, was there for every anniversary dinner and birthday celebration. When we bought our house 2 years ago, Emma took a week off work to help us paint the entire first floor. She said she wanted it to be perfect for us, that we deserved a beautiful home to start the next chapter of our lives. When Jake got promoted to senior architect last year, Emma threw us a surprise party. She invited all our friends, ordered food from our favorite restaurant, and even hired a photographer to capture the celebration. She said she wanted us to remember this moment forever, when Jake's hard work finally paid off. Looking back now, I realize how perfectly positioned she was for what came next. She knew everything about our lives, our daily routines, our work schedules, our weekend plans. She knew which mornings Jake went for runs and which nights I worked late. She knew that we kept our spare key under the planter by the front door, that Jake always took his phone calls in his office upstairs, that I did laundry every Saturday morning while listening to my true crime podcasts. More importantly, she knew our problems. Every fight Jake and I had, every moment of frustration or doubt, every time I felt disconnected from my husband. Emma knew about it all. Because that's what best friends do, right? They share everything. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Emma knew that Jake had been working longer hours lately, that I sometimes felt like we were ships passing in the night. She knew I worried about becoming one of those married couples who stopped really seeing each other, who went through the motions without the passion. She knew that sometimes I felt taken for granted, that I wished Jake would surprise me more often or be more spontaneous like he used to be. What I didn't know was that Emma had been documenting everything. Every fight Jake and I had, every time I mentioned feeling distant from him, every moment of vulnerability I shared with her thinking I was talking to my best friend. She was filing it all away for later use. She was studying my marriage like it was a case study, looking for weaknesses, for opportunities, for the perfect moment to strike. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the day everything started to unravel. The day I first noticed that something wasn't quite right between the two people I loved most in the world. It was a Tuesday morning in March. I remember the exact date, March 15th, because it was the day before my company's biggest conference of the year. I'd been preparing for months to present our new campaign strategy to potential clients, and I was nervous as hell. I had to catch a 6 a.m. flight, which meant leaving the house by 4:30. Jake had offered to drive me to the airport, but I told him to sleep in. He'd been pulling late nights at the office trying to finish plans for a major commercial project, and I knew he needed the rest. As I was doing my final packing check, throwing last-minute items into my suitcase, I realized I'd forgotten my phone charger downstairs in the kitchen. This was going to be a 4-day trip, the longest Jake and I had been apart in months, and I couldn't risk being unreachable if something important came up with work. I grabbed my suitcase and headed downstairs, expecting the house to be dark and quiet. But as I rounded the corner into our kitchen, I saw the lights were on. And I wasn't alone. Jake and Emma were in our kitchen. Now, this wasn't completely unusual. Emma often stopped by for coffee before work. Her office was only about 10 minutes from our house, and she loved our espresso machine. Jake was always happy to make her a cup before he started his day. They'd sit at our kitchen island, talking about work or weekend plans or whatever was on the news that morning. But something about this morning felt different. They were standing closer than normal, for one thing. Not inappropriately close, but intimate. Emma was wearing one of those flowy blouses she loved, the kind that made her look effortlessly elegant even at 5 a.m. Her hair was down instead of in her usual work ponytail, and she was looking up at Jake with this expression I'd never seen before. Soft. Almost adoring. Jake was leaning against the counter, still in his pajama pants and a t-shirt, holding a mug of coffee. His free hand was gesturing as he spoke, the way he always did when he was excited about something. But when he saw me, his hand dropped immediately to his side. "Oh, Sarah, I didn't know you were still here," Emma said, her cheeks flushing slightly. She took a small step back from Jake, which made me notice how close they'd been standing in the first place. Jake turned toward me with a smile that seemed just a little too bright, a little too forced. "Emma was just telling me about her disaster date last night," he said, moving to pour me a travel mug of coffee. Guy showed up 30 minutes late and then had the audacity to split the bill on a $12 appetizer. I laughed because the story was funny and because Emma's dating horror stories were legendary among our friend group. But something nagged at me. If Emma was telling Jake about her date, Why had they looked so serious when I walked in? Why was she standing so close to him? And why did Jake seem almost guilty? Now, I want to be clear here. I'm not a jealous person by nature. I'd never been the type to get suspicious about Jake talking to other women. Emma and Jake had known each other almost as long as she and I had been friends. They were comfortable with each other. They had their own friendship separate from me, and I'd always been happy about that. It meant my husband and best friend got along, which made family gatherings and group hangouts so much easier. But this felt different. There was an energy in the room that I couldn't quite identify. Something charged, almost electric. "What time is your Uber getting here?" Jake asked, handing me the travel mug and kissing my forehead. "Any minute now," I said, checking my phone. "Are you sure you don't mind me taking the early flight? I could have taken the 8 a.m. and we could have had breakfast together." "Don't be silly," Emma interrupted. "You need to be well rested for your presentation. Jake and I will just have to entertain ourselves without you for a few days." She said it with a laugh, but something about the phrasing made my stomach tighten. Entertain ourselves. Not Jake will have to entertain himself, or I'll miss having you around. We. Like they were a unit. My phone buzzed with a text from my Uber driver saying he was outside. I grabbed my suitcase and hugged both of them goodbye, Emma first, then Jake. As I hugged Emma, I caught a whiff of her perfume. It was different from her usual scent, something warmer and more sensual. The kind of fragrance you wear when you want to make an impression. At 5 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, I kissed Jake goodbye, reminding him about the leftovers in the fridge and asking him to water my plants while I was gone. Normal married couple stuff. But as I rolled my suitcase toward the door, I heard Emma's voice behind me. "Don't worry about Jake," she called out. "I'll make sure he takes care of himself while you're gone." I turned back to wave goodbye, and that's when I saw it. Emma's hand was on Jake's arm again, her fingers resting just above his elbow. It was a casual touch, the kind of gesture that could be completely innocent. But the way Jake was looking down at her hand, the way his posture seemed to relax under her touch. As my Uber pulled away from the house, I looked back through the rear window. Jake and Emma were still standing in our doorway, silhouetted against the warm light of our kitchen. They were talking again, their heads bent close together, and Emma's hand never left his arm. That image stuck with me during my entire flight to Chicago. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of the conference was making me see things that weren't there. Emma was my best friend. Jake was my husband. They cared about each other because they both cared about me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in my house that morning. Something fundamental had changed between them, and I was the only one who didn't know what it was. If I'd trusted my instincts that day, if I'd canceled my trip and stayed home to figure out what was really going on, maybe I could have stopped what happened next. But I didn't. I got on that plane, flew to Chicago, and spent 4 days in meetings and presentations, completely unaware that back home, my husband and best friend were putting the final touches on a plan that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. Because what I discovered when I came back from that trip, what I found hidden in my own house, it proved that everything I saw that morning was just the tip of the iceberg. Emma and Jake hadn't just been talking. They'd been planning for months. And the pregnancy test I found was a mine. But before I tell you about that discovery, I need you to understand how carefully they'd been manipulating me. How every conversation, every favor, every moment of support had been designed to set up their ultimate betrayal. Make sure you're subscribed because what I'm about to reveal will shock you. And if you're enjoying this story, hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Trust me, you won't see what's coming next. When I got back from my business trip, everything seemed normal. Jake picked me up from the airport. We grabbed dinner at our favorite restaurant, and I told Emma all about the conference over coffee the next day. But now, knowing what I know, I can see how perfectly orchestrated everything was. See, during that trip, I'd been feeling disconnected from Jake. We'd been having some minor issues, nothing serious, just the usual stuff couples go through. He'd been working late more often, I'd been stressed about a promotion at work, and we hadn't been spending as much quality time together. I did what I always did when something was bothering me. I talked to Emma about it. I told her how Jake seemed distant lately, how I worried we were falling into a routine, how I sometimes felt like we were more like roommates than lovers. Emma listened so carefully, asked all the right questions, made all the right sympathetic noises. She even suggested ways I could reconnect with Jake: date nights, surprise gestures, better communication. What I didn't realize was that Emma was taking notes. Mental notes about every weakness in my marriage, every insecurity I had, every moment when Jake and I weren't perfectly aligned. And then, about a month after that trip, Emma started having fertility issues.
She'd been to the doctor, she said.
They'd found some concerns about her ability to conceive naturally. She was devastated. She'd always wanted children, and now she was worried she might never have them. Of course, I was there for her. We spent hours talking about her options, fertility treatments, adoption, freezing her eggs. I held her while she cried about the unfairness of it all. And then Emma mentioned something that, at the time, seemed like an innocent observation. "You and Jake are so lucky," she said one evening as we sat in my living room. "You have such good genes. Your kids are going to be beautiful and smart and healthy." I thanked her, but something about the way she said it made me uncomfortable. There was a wistfulness there, almost like she was imagining what it would be like to have Jake's children. But I pushed that thought away. Emma was my best friend. She was hurting about her fertility issues. Of course, she'd be emotional about the idea of children. What I didn't know was that Emma had been visiting a fertility specialist, but not for the reasons she told me. She'd been asking about artificial insemination, about using a known donor, about how to time everything perfectly. And Jake. Jake had been researching the same things. The truth came out 3 weeks ago, on a Saturday morning that started like any other. Jake had gone for his usual morning run, and I was doing some cleaning around the house. I was in our bedroom, changing the sheets, when something fell out of Jake's pillowcase. A small piece of paper, folded multiple times. Now, I'm not the type to snoop through my husband's things, but something about the way this paper was hidden, tucked so carefully into his pillowcase, made my heart race. I unfolded it with shaking hands. It was a fertility clinic appointment card, with Emma's name on it, and Jake listed as her support partner. The appointment was for the following Tuesday. The note section said, "Intrauterine insemination consultation, known donor." I stared at that card for what felt like hours. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. Why would Jake have Emma's fertility appointment information? Why was he listed as her support partner? And what did known donor mean? That's when I heard Jake's phone buzzing on his nightstand. He'd left it behind when he went for his run, something he never usually did. The screen lit up with a text notification from Emma. "Can't wait for Tuesday. I've been tracking my cycle, and everything looks perfect. This is really happening." 2 hearts. My hands were shaking as I picked up his phone. I knew his passcode. We'd never hidden anything from each other. Or so I thought. What I found in their text thread going back months, it was worse than any affair. They weren't just sleeping together. They were planning to create a life together, while I remained completely oblivious. And every message showed exactly how they'd been manipulating me. There were messages between Jake and Emma going back 6 months. Text message screenshots. Even a calendar with dates circled in red. They weren't having an affair in the traditional sense. It was worse than that. They were planning to have a baby together, using artificial insemination, while staying married to me. But the most devastating part? The messages showed exactly how they'd been manipulating me. Sarah mentioned again how distant we've been lately. One of Jake's messaged read, "She's definitely feeling insecure about our relationship. This is perfect timing for your fertility crisis storyline." Emma's response, "I'll start talking about my biological clock more. Maybe mention how I wish I could find someone as good as Jake." Plant those seeds. They had been using my own insecurities against me. Every conversation I'd had with Emma about my marriage, every moment of vulnerability I'd shared, they'd turned it into ammunition for their plan. But there was more. So much more. As I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence of their betrayal, I realized just how deep this conspiracy went. They had thought of everything. The plan was for Emma to get pregnant using Jake's sperm through artificial insemination. They tell me that Emma had decided to use an anonymous sperm donor, and Jake would just be supporting his wife's best friend through a difficult time. But Jake wouldn't just be a donor. The messages made it clear that he planned to be involved in this child's life. Not as a father figure, that would be too obvious, but as Uncle Jake, the devoted family friend who is always around, always helping, always there for important moments. They'd even discussed how to handle holidays, birthdays, school events, how to make sure Jake had access to his biological child without arousing my suspicion. And if I ever got suspicious, they had a plan for that too. Emma would cry and talk about how hurt she was that I didn't trust her friendship. Jake would act bewildered and wounded that I could think such a thing. They'd make me feel guilty for even questioning their motives. But the most sickening part was how they talked about me in those messages. "Sarah's so trusting," Emma had written. "She'll never suspect anything. She sees the best in everyone, especially us." Jake's response: "I almost feel bad about this. But Sarah's been so focused on work lately, and Emma needs this. It's not like I'm leaving Sarah. I'm just helping a friend." Helping a friend. That's how he rationalized betraying his wife and planning to father a secret child. I found their backup plans too. If I discovered the truth after Emma was pregnant, they'd claim it was a one-time mistake, a moment of weakness when Emma was emotional about her fertility issues. If I found out before, they'd say they were just discussing possibilities, nothing concrete. They'd even researched divorce lawyers, just in case their plan fell apart, and they decided to be together openly. But the message that broke me, the one that made me realize I never really knew either of these people, was from Emma to Jake, dated just 2 weeks before I found everything. "I can't wait to have your baby," she'd written. "Sarah will never know, and honestly, after 6 years of watching you with her, I think I'll be a better mother to your children anyway." That's when I knew my marriage was over. I had 2 choices. I could pretend I never found anything and try to catch them in the act, or I could confront them immediately. I chose confrontation. I took photos of everything with my phone and waited for Jake to come home from his run. When he walked in, sweaty and unsuspecting, I was sitting at our kitchen table with every piece of evidence spread out in front of me. "Sit down, Jake," I said calmly. "We need to talk." The look on his face when he saw the card in my hand, then followed by the screenshot that stared glaringly at him. I'll never forget it. Pure panic, followed by guilt, followed by a desperate attempt to look confused. "Sarah, what is all this? Where did you get these?" I just stared at him. "Really? That's how you're going to play this?" For the next hour, I watched my husband of 6 years cycle through every stage of a caught liar. Denial, minimization, blame shifting, and finally, when he realized there was no escape, a pathetic attempt at justification. "It wasn't supposed to hurt you," he said. "You were never supposed to find out. Emma just wanted a baby, and I thought I could help her without affecting us." "Without affecting us?" I repeated. "You were planning to father another woman's child behind my back. How exactly wouldn't that affect us?" And that's when Jake said something that proved I never really knew him at all. "Maybe if you'd been more supportive lately, if you'd been more present in our marriage, I wouldn't have felt so disconnected. Emma makes me feel appreciated." He was blaming me for his betrayal, for his choice to plan a secret family with my best friend. That's when I knew I was done fighting for a marriage that had been a lie. 3 weeks later, I'm living in my own apartment. Jake is staying in our house, and Emma tried to call me 47 times the day I confronted Jake. I haven't answered once. The divorce papers are filed. Jake can have his relationship with Emma now. Openly, honestly, the way they should have done from the beginning. Here's what I learned from this experience. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, investigate. Don't let people convince you that your gut feelings are just paranoia or jealousy. And most importantly, pay attention to how people talk about your relationships. Emma knew every weakness in my marriage because I told her. She used my trust against me. If you're going through something similar, know this. You deserve better. You deserve honesty, loyalty, and respect. Don't settle for people who see your love as an opportunity to manipulate. Thank you for listening to my story. Hit that subscribe button if you want more real relationship stories, and remember, you're stronger than you think. I'll see you in the next one.